EFF says it'll lay a complaint against Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo with the JSE itself, and in fact has called for the removal of Justice Minister Ronald Lamola from office. The party is accusing Zondo of unethical conduct and the minister of attempting to manipulate the judicial appointment processes. For more on this, let's bring in EFF Head of Presidency, Sinawo Tambo, who joins us now via our telephone line. And Sinawo, it's great to chat to you. Thanks very much for making time for us here on Newzroom Afrika. At the heart of this, I understand, is a series of calls and letters that were exchanged between Raymond Zondo and Ronald Lamola. As a start, for the benefit of those who weren't watching all of yesterday's proceedings, what does the EFF know about the contents of these exchanges?
Look, greetings to you and greetings to your viewers. In our understanding, based on Acting Chief Justice's witting or unwitting revelations yesterday during the proceedings, the Acting Chief Justice was put under undue pressure by Minister Lamola to appoint a specific candidate into the Constitutional Court without any logical or sound reasoning. And this is because when the Minister Lamola tried to say to the Acting Chief Justice that firstly, there are certain judges that are not being considered for acting positions in the Court, the Acting Chief Justice was able to rebut that assertion by saying, no, here is the list. And in fact, the candidate that the minister spoke on specifically, which was Justice Lambo, was on the list and declined. And in fact, even your suggestion at this current point in time is late, considering the stage of the process that they were in. But for some inexplicable reason, which seemed to have come after a phone call between the minister and the Acting Chief Justice, Judge President Lambo ended up being on those candidate lists, and in fact, ultimately ended up being appointed along with Advocate Untala, resulting in the two candidates that the Acting Chief Justice had proposed initially being scrapped to the side. So to us, this is in no uncertain terms a form of judicial capture and a measure of judicial manipulation of appointment of judges, which might seek to, in the ultimate end, put Judge President Justice Lambo as the Chief Justice of South Africa because of having placed him in a position where he will have had experience in the Court due to this improper process of appointment, which is not only immoral, but also borders on illegality because concurrence was not reached between the Chief Justice and the Minister. Rather, there was undue pressure placed on the Chief Justice himself.
I'll be clear, Sinawo, I'm not quite clear what the law has to say about this, but you've touched on what I was hoping to ask you. On the face of it, it's easy to make an argument around why this, at the very least, was unethical because of the principle of separation of powers, amongst many other issues. But do we know whether it's actually illegal for something like this to happen?
Look, the defense that the Minister attempted to position during the proceedings in the JSE yesterday seems to suggest that the Constitution allows for this at a legal basis. But this is not what happened in this instance, and that's what we must be able to emphasize, which we are glad that Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo was able to allude to, that it is not the norm that one arm of the state reaches out to another arm of the state, being the judiciary, and puts a level of pressure that a certain candidate must be appointed. In ordinary circumstances, it is the Chief Justice that formulates a list of candidates and reaches concurrence with the President with a recommendation from the Minister of Justice as well. So what happened here is that out of the blue, for some inexplicable reason, which we are only able to conclude is a reason that there's some interest, in a very specific interest in Lambo being appointed, the Minister kept on placing pressure on the Acting Chief Justice despite him providing logical and sound reasons as to why this specific candidate is not under consideration for an Acting Chief Justice position. So capture is very insidious, as we've been able to learn over the past couple of years. It borders on illegality. So there's always those blurred lines between illegality and unethical conduct. And I think this is where this case has come up in the specific instance. It doesn't land squarely in illegality, but we're able to see that there's an insidious behavior that is out of the norm, as Justice Zondo was able to tell us yesterday. That shows us that there's an undue and inexplicable interest in Justice Lambo being an acting justice, and that only leaves us to conclude that that was leading up to these interviews to be able to place him in a position where he's considered with some level of experience.
Allow me to press you on the conclusion that the EFF makes. Even in your statement, it's pretty clear. You're saying that all of this, the communication, the recommendation of Justice Lambo as the acting Chief Justice, was to place him in a position where he'll be able to take up the role of Chief Justice. For those who are struggling to connect those specific dots, help us understand how that is the unequivocal conclusion, at least from the reading of the EFF.
So in our understanding as the EFF, once you place Judge President Justice Lambo as the acting Chief Justice on these questionable circumstances, circumstances. He's in a position where he's considered on the basis that he's already had some level of experience in the Concourt of the Justice. So his appointment as the Chief Justice is going to be beefed up by a level of credentials stemming from him being a judge president, stemming from him being an acting Chief Justice, which will ultimately lead to deliberations considering him with these levels of credentials. So him being an acting Chief Justice is not inconsequential, which is why Ronald Lamola placed so much pressure on acting Chief Justice Zondo to consider him and ultimately appoint him. Because he knew that a chain of events happens during deliberations where certain credentials are considered. So this rush to include him in that process, even after Mlambo declined, mind you, which means that Mlambo was also needed to be convinced that you have to be able to take an acting Chief Justice position in the Concourt because you have never been one. And this is going to help bolster arguments within deliberations in terms of why must you be appointed as a Chief Justice in yourself as onto his credentials. So our train of thought or connecting of dots, those who used to like to emphasize a lot about state capture and connecting narratives, is that it had to be done in order to bolster his credentials repertoire, in order to make sure that during deliberations, the Judge President Dustin Mlambo is considered with those credentials of having been in the Concourt prior to being appointed and deliberated upon the Chief Justice ultimately.
I'm sure you'll agree that the timing around all of this is incredibly important. You're now asking for some kind of action from the JSC. In fact, the EFF has written a complaint or laid a complaint against the acting Chief Justice. What are you hoping the JSC will do?
Look, we're hoping the JSC will be able to show the dishonesty of acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, who prided himself in his declining of the recusal application by former President Jacob Zuma that he had no intimate or personal relationship with him. The proceedings yesterday showed to us that acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo was able to take into concern political utterances that happened in the past while he was a sitting judge and call a meeting with the former President Jacob Zuma in order to ask him to intervene on political utterances made by the former NCUC President, who was CIC Julius Malema at the time. So that is misconduct in our understanding, because he proceeded later on to preside over matters between the former President Jacob Zuma and the EFF, knowing that he had had a personal and political interaction with Jacob Zuma regarding the political leader of the EFF, who is today Julius Malema. So in our understanding, he was meant to disclose that at some point in the stage. But secondly to that, there are two occasions where the acting Chief Justice says that he met with former President Jacob Zuma in a hotel in Durban, but he cannot seem to remember what they discussed. So for us, there's too much ease for the Chief Justice to meet politicians regarding political matters and also to descend into the political arena and respond to ministers' opinion pieces, because he seems to blur the lines between himself being a member of the judiciary, being a politician, and the relationships he has with certain politicians to be able to meet with them. So we think that's misconduct. We think that he should have disclosed that before presiding over matters where he knows he has met certain people regarding litigants, and that's something that the JSC must consider.
Sinawo Tambo is the head of presidency within the EFF. Sinawo, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate it.